Jerusalem, the city of peace, which became a city of bloody battles in June 1967, witnessed a 90-minute display of military equipment and manpower staged by Tzahal on May 2nd, 1968, to mark the 20th anniversary of Israel's independence. More than 500,000 people, or 1 out of every 5 Israelis, lined the route to watch this first parade since the Six-Day War. Among the thousands of visitors and important guests seated in the grandstands were ministers, senior officers of Tzahal, and Arab and Druze notables. Members of the diplomatic corps and military attachés together with their wives and families. Flanked by outriders, the motorcade arrives bringing the Prime Minister, Mr. Levi Eshkol, the Defense Minister, Mr. Moshe Dayan, and Tsahal's Chief of Staff, General Chaim Bar-Lev. Awaiting them in front of the saluting base is General Uri Narkis, commander of the Central Front during the Six-Day War. The President of the State of Israel, Mr. Zalman Shazar, and Mrs. Shazar arrive in the presidential car. His arrival marks the official opening of the parade. First, the traditional ceremony of changing the colors, which are handed over to the Air Force for safekeeping until Independence Day next year. Certainly the Air Force deserves this honor for the amazing feats of daring and precision which played so vital a part in aborting the aggressive designs of the Arab states a year ago and destroyed the planes and airfields of the enemy poised to strike. Proving that in peace as well as in war, the Air Force can enthrall, the military display opens with a flight of Fuga Magister jet training planes. Following them are 30 Fuga Magisters flying in formation to represent Israel's national emblem, the Shield of David. Each flight of these diamond-shaped formations consists of 8 Mirages, the French-manufactured jet fighter planes which Israeli pilots have made famous. The Mirages are comparable to the Russian Tupolev 16 and Ilyushin 28, used by the Egyptian Air Force, although these latter proved no match for them during the Six-Day War. The American-made Skyhawks, a comparative newcomer to Israel's Air Force. These are long-range bombers, and although not fast in terms of jet aircraft, are more maneuverable at low altitudes than many faster planes. French-made Ouragan light bombers and the Mystère fighter bombers were among the Air Force's first acquisitions in France. A former chief of the Air Force said that we have always assumed we would be fighting against the best air forces in the world and set out to prove that they were not. These Vatour long-range bomber fighters were used to destroy the Egyptian MiG-21s at Luxor airfield on June 5th last year. This lone Russian MiG-21 was a gift from an Iraqi Air Force major who deserted his units 2 years ago and landed in Israel. These Nord transport planes are clumsy-looking skybirds. Like the Stratocruiser transports follow them, they played an important role in the 1956 Sinai campaign when they dropped parachute troops on enemy positions in the Mitla Pass. These helicopters are Sikorsky S-58s and Super Ferland, both of which were widely used during the Six-Day War as parachute troop carriers and as aerial ambulances to evacuate the wounded. The Bell 205 helicopters are now in use with the Israel Air Force against infiltrators from across the Jordan River. Completing the air show are Fuga Magisters in a delightful ballet of color and movement. Heads can now be lowered and eyesights readjusted to ground level as the parade swings into action. First come the motorcycle outriders, mainly needed for carrying dispatches and directing traffic, followed by jeeps bearing the company standards. The armored half-tracks are used for carrying the infantry, who no longer march to war. Flat feet are no excuse for keeping out of the foot sluggers' units. These French-made AMX light tanks proved too light for useful service in Sinai, but in the battle for Nablus, one company destroyed a large part of a Jordanian pattern force of 41 tanks without losing a single one of their own. American-made Sherman tanks were used by the Allies in World War II. Purchased by Tzahal off the scrap heap, they were equipped with new guns and did an excellent job of work in scaling the Golan Heights on the Syrian frontier during the Six-Day War. The American-made Patton tanks which raced across the Sinai Desert to reach the Suez Canal. These are British-made Centurion tanks. The core tradition that commanders always stand exposed in their open turrets enables them to sight and strike the enemy rapidly and accurately. The need for easily mobile artillery produced these recoilless guns mounted on jeeps. But during the battle for Jerusalem, jeeps were urgently needed to evacuate the many wounded, and these were sent on their mission of mercy, returning to the fray immediately afterwards. The artillery corps is trained in the art of efficiently handling these anti-tank missiles and 160mm mortars. Anti-aircraft guns with their mobile radar equipment took little part in the Six-Day War, but is nonetheless very important to the defense of Israel's civilian centers. These are the American-made Hawk surface-to-air missiles. Bringing up the rear of the artillery display are the 105mm guns. The Six-Day War produced a vast mass of equipment captured by Tzahal on all fronts. Much of it was taken undamaged and is used in various units. The Egyptian equipment is white, the Jordanian striped, and the Syrian gray. The Egyptian armored vehicles are followed by amphibious personnel carriers and tanks taken on all three fronts. They must have heard of Israel's national water carrier from Lake Kinneret to the Negev and thought these tanks would help them cross it. Egyptian anti-air tanks. The famous T-55 heavy Russian tanks equipped with infrared ray for night fighting. These are the Stalin tanks used by the Egyptian armed forces, followed by anti-tank missiles, also taken from the Egyptians. But it was the Syrian army which left behind these 122mm guns. The Jordanians provided these long toms, with which they managed to land a few shells on Tel Aviv. The Katyushkas were used most effectively by the Russians against the Germans in World War II. The famous SAM-2 surface-to-air missiles were taken together with all the necessary equipment from their base in the Sinai Desert. And now back to Israeli-produced equipment. Many are the faces of Israel's fighting men, for they come from 100 countries and as many backgrounds and traditions. Israel molds them into one, and Jerusalem makes them whole. Young cadets of an infantry officer's course. These are the lads who order their men to follow me. Air cadets of a pilot's training course. Every nice girl loves a sailor, says the old song. This group of cadets are on a parachutist course. This was the unit whose men were first to reach the Wailing Wall in June 1967. Faces of the women who stayed behind. This is the infantry, but they only march on parades. There are many jobs for girls in Tzahal. They are clerks, typists, signals personnel, they stand guard and in general relieve the men for more onerous tasks. They are also a pleasure to have around. The engineering corps is reserved for the fit and the brave. These lads of the Border Defense Unit are all volunteers. They have the job of watching the borders for infiltrators, of guarding the frontiers against those who seek to spread havoc and panic. The Israel Police Force comes under military command in wartime. And last but not least, the military police. And as the Fouga Magisters complete their aerial ballet, this 20th anniversary parade of Israel's Defense Force comes to an end. May it be granted that this city of peace, Jerusalem, may never more know the sound of war, and from it will spread the ancient prophecy that strong nations shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks.